everybody. Thank you for being with us at Coalesce, everyone here and everyone joining us online. We'll give people a second to get settled into their seats here. I'll be the MC of the session today, introducing our speakers. My name is Ryan McGibney. I am from the DBT Labs partnerships team. I get to work with consulting partners who bring DBT to their clients, and I'm happy to be here to introduce one of our great consulting partners, Montreal Analytics. They will be delivering a session entitled Automating DBT Development with Pre-Commit. And our speakers are Hassan Al-Rabi, who is a lead consultant at Montreal Analytics. He's also a co-organizer of the Montreal Startup Drinks Meetup. And we've got Cecile Chow, who is a data consultant at Montreal Analytics. She describes herself as an autodidact and loves connecting with people from diverse backgrounds. So she'll be sharing some of that knowledge that she has collected over the years with you all today. A quick note on the session today: the Slack channel that you want to be joining is Coalesce Workshop Automating DBT. If you have not yet joined the DBT community Slack, you can do so at community.getdbt.com. And I will go ahead and hand it off to our speakers here.
Thank you, Ryan. So before we begin, just one thing that I wanted to mention was to go ahead and follow the link here, mtla.pro/guide, where you can access all of the detailed steps that we're about to go through today with all the code. You can just copy and paste, put it within your repo, and run everything. So I'll give you a fair warning. We're going to get technical. We're going to go into a few steps. I'm going to do stuff live. Wish me luck. But in case you get lost, don't worry. It will be recorded. It will be shared. You will have the documentation here. So again, mtla.pro/guide. In terms of technical requirement, you need Python, you need DBT, ability to install Python packages, and of course, GitHub. Before we kind of dive in, I just want to introduce some of the other speakers. My name is Hassan. I'm joined here with Cecile today. I wanted to give a shout out as well. We have some teaching assistants and TAs around the room. So we have Dang, Patrick, and Raphael. Please raise your hands so that everyone knows. So if you have a question, you're kind of stuck at some point, please ask away. They'll help. And if you would prefer to ask questions online or you're joining us online, we have Martin, Chris, and Lauren, who will be our Slack champions during this workshop. The agenda, we're going to talk a little bit just about Montreal Analytics, go through the introduction of the problem at hand, and then we're going to dive into the workshop, the setup, the configuration of pre-commit, and actually working and using pre-commit, and we'll conclude with some final remarks. Now, Montreal Analytics is a full-stack data consultancy firm that was established in Montreal in January 2020. And since then, we've grown a lot. We have now over 50 members worldwide, as well as clients worldwide. Mission is straightforward. We want to help companies grow and innovate through data and analytics. And we do so by offering a myriad of services: architecture design, data modeling, deployment, audits, and enablement. We're also proud to announce that we have over 20 certified DBT developers in-house and have obtained the Platinum DBT Certification Award this year. Other than DBT, we also have expertise in the full data stack, and we are happy to be working with the following partners that you see here. And now I'll pass it off to Cecile to dive into the problem.
Yeah, so why are we all here? Our workshop is to solve a problem that we see as consultants at Montreal Analytics. So we work on a lot of DBT projects for multiple clients, and we do a lot of DBT development for them as well. So there's a lot of committing, pushing, merging, and each of those steps is an opportunity to introduce errors or breaking code standards or wasting time on tedious tasks. So how can we solve these changes? Sorry, how can we make these changes safer, more consistent, and more efficient? And so our workshop solution is to look at the workflow changes that can make DBT development safer and more efficient. So some of the, we can deploy local automation like pre-commit with DBT core, which is using the command line interface, continuous integration automation with DBT cloud, or implementing a process like a pull request template. And in this workshop, we'll be using our Poutine Shop DBT project. So who doesn't know what poutine is, it's a Quebec delicacy, I guess.
Delicacy is one way to put it. It's basically
It's,
fries,
French fries,
gravy, cheese.
cheese curds.
Yes,
Gotta have those squeaky cheese curds in there.
squeakiest.
So we'll have that sandbox environment for everyone to use. And what we'll be implementing as an example of a workflow automation is using pre-commit. So where does pre-commit fit in? We'll talk about the larger software development lifecycle just as a quick diagram here. On the left, we go from feature request to refinement to solution design, development, then maintenance. So for pre-commit, and a lot of us who do DBT development, we're at the development step. We commit locally, we push to remote, we validate and review, and we merge. So within those steps, we can introduce pre-commit. This following diagram is just more of a magnified view of that development phase. So as DBT developers, once again, you see the commit, the push, the review, and validate and merge. So with each of those steps in the workflow, we can apply pre-commit, but I guess a good candidate for automation is right where you're committing on your local machine. So that way, you can kind of catch those errors more quickly. And just to move on to this topic of software development lifecycle, for those who don't have a general concept of it, it's, once again, like, we get to this point where maybe at your company, how does a product need become a product feature? So the software development lifecycle is a multi-step process, and that helps clarify, develop, test, validate, and deploy a feature. And once again, it introduces many opportunities to have process and automation and speed up development and de-risk development as well. And onto the concept of pre-commit. So pre-commit, as we saw, various stages of the Git workflow we can implement it at. Pre-commit itself is an open source technology, orchestrates Git hooks at various points in the Git workflow. It's downloaded through the command line. You can configure it per project using a YAML file. And just because it's called pre-commit, it doesn't actually just do hooks at the pre-commit stage. You can also use it pre-push, post-commit, as well as many other options there. And also, you can also leverage it for linting, software testing, and test automation as well. And the last concept before we get into the workshop itself is continuous integration. So you may have heard of the CI/CD paradigm. CI is continuous integration. That's where we look at the changes and we integrate those changes into the centralized code base. And CD itself is continuous delivery or deployment of these changes to users in production. So for DBT, CI is easily handled by DBT Cloud, or alternatively, you can use GitHub Actions to manually configure that tooling. And so for the workshop, just to kind of give you the context, Hassan will be using Visual Studio Code as the editor, the built-in terminal and iTerm as the terminal, as well as we'll be using GitHub and Snowflake for our data and repository. So just want to let you all know, if you're joining us now online or in person, we do have help on Slack, so please join us on Coalesce Workshop Automating DBT. And if ever you get lost during this workshop, please refer to the guide that we have at mtla.pro/guide. And in the room, we also have our TAs here as well. So without further ado, let's pass it on to Hassan to do some live coding.
Thank you, Cecile. So to start off, we're just going to go ahead and actually clone the repo, and I'm going to clone it on my device. So in this case, this workshop is of course tailored to the Poutine shop that we have, but these steps are quite easily adaptable for your own DBT projects. And of course, we're also going to be releasing a kind of a blog version of this tutorial that you could, so stay tuned for that. Now, the repo that I'm going to clone is Poutine shop -public. So it will be, you can find it in the Montreal Analytics GitHub, but also it should be available within the guide. Now, I'm going to go ahead and start to actually create this folder that I'm going to be using. And then within this folder, I'm going to go ahead and clone the repo that I will be using. So I'm going straight from raw nothing. So we have our project ready to go. The next step, the main master branch is actually fixed. There is no errors on the main master branch that we have here. So we're going to go ahead and actually check out the coalesce broken branch that we see here. So I'm just going to fire up Visual Studio Code so we can also get to see this. Between shop public, and I'm going to fire up my virtual environment here that I created. So I created if you saw in the previous code, a Python 3.9 virtual environment, and within it, I have this repo. And I'm just going to check out the broken coalesce branch. So now I should be on this branch that has all of these kind of broken components that we need to find and fix. I'll give you a moment. Now, in order to connect, you can go ahead and use the profiles YAML file that is available on the guide. So with it, you can actually use this user, use this password. It's open to everybody for this workshop to kind of jump in and start testing things out. In my case, I'll go ahead and open up this profiles YAML file that what I see here. So you can see I'm connected in the same fashion. The one thing to change is, of course, the schema. So in this case, I'm targeting my own schema called dbt_Hassan. Name it to whatever you like, so that when you build the project, you build within your own schema and you stay within that schema. Other than that, I'm using the same credentials that was shared with you in the guide. Now, we're going to move on to configuring pre-commit.
Yeah, so here we're going to pre-configure pre-commit, our framework for automating and testing. We'll go through these steps of configuring our Python dependencies as well as the pre-commit framework itself. And our last step would be updating the README, the markdown file there.
So what we just basically did, and what we actually want to do here is to create a requirements.txt file, just because this is where I want to specify all the required software that I'm going to need for my project. So I want to install pre-commit, and I need all of the developers at my company to have the same software, the same workflow, the same things on their device, so that we're all running the same software and the same version of DBT as well. So this is where we would want to install any dependencies, and overall it just simplifies sharing environments across individuals. So with this workflow, what I'm going to be doing is installing one virtual environment where I'm going to have my software, DBT, pre-commit, everything, and then I'm going to also be installing another virtual environment where the hooks, these tests, will be running as well. So, before I go in, few things on development environments.
For sure, yeah. So let's just, for those maybe unfamiliar with development environments, Hassan had quickly walked through some of the things that we will be going through. But at a high level, development environments are, a sandbox equivalent of your production environment. So here, you can work through your code, make changes. You're not going to break the environment in production because these are totally separate. And that's the reason why we want to keep it that way. So some attributes are, keeping it close to production as possible, being changeable and breakable without actually affecting any production users, as well as separating access control from production. And what we just did in the previous step is set up our DBT profile, so that also helps with the infrastructure of your development environment, roles specific to development, as well as database schemas, as well as Snowflake warehouses. So with that schema that you wrote in your DBT profile, that is contained within your DBT schema. So that way it won't affect production, write all the code you want, break everything you want, won't affect anyone. And onto a virtual environment. So for us, virtual environments are very, very useful because as consultants, sometimes we're working on multiple projects. And so maybe you need different versions of DBT or different versions of Python. So with those, that's just separating your dependencies into self-contained containers and spaces. So we'll be creating one shortly with we'll be installing our requirements into one shortly, but once again, like I said, they're easily made, destroyed. You can switch between different DBT versions, and some of the tools that we use for Python, creating Python virtual environments are just on the bottom there.
So the one step that I didn't show you is how I set up my virtual environment initially, just because every computer is going to be different. You can use Conda, you can use venv, you can use pyenv. So this is, and you don't necessarily, if you're doing work on your Office laptop, you don't necessarily need a virtual environment either. You could just use the project itself and just build within it. But for us, when we're working with a lot of different DBT projects, we need to containerize all of these things. So now let's create this requirements.txt file, switching over to my repo over here. Let me hide this. We can see that I already have one over here, and you should see the same thing. So far what's specified is that I need DBT Snowflake. Fantastic. Now, what I also need is pre-commit 2.8, and I can actually also copy it. So I'm going to be copying from the guide here, and I say I need pre-commit for this project. So I'm going to go ahead and add it there. And once I have this, I can now just install all of the requirements that I have here. So if someone, because we cloned the repo and we installed it here, but we didn't actually install DBT yet. We didn't install pre-commit yet. And now is the time to actually do all of this. So opening up the terminal, I'm going to go ahead and install all the requirements here. So it's going to install DBT, it's going to install pre-commit. In this case, I already had DBT installed, I already had pre-commit installed. For you, it should take a few seconds and you would get to the same thing.
Just as a reminder for people who are updating that requirements text file, don't forget to save it. Otherwise, the pre-commit will not actually install when you do the pip install there.
Yes, I have a habit of just Control S at all times. So, but yes, please do save the files every time you make a change. And then let's actually check if everything is working fine. So I'm going to run the debug command. The debug command is going to check if I have all the proper connections. And let's go ahead and do this. So dbt debug. Fantastic. My profiles YAML file was correct. The DBT project is fine. Git, the connection, everything is good. So we can then install any dependencies packages that we've outlined within this project. So DBT utils, DBT expectations, and some other things. Aha. I think everyone is doing the same thing, so it's taking a little bit longer. Okay, we have our dependencies ready to go. And the next step would be to actually build the project. So I would say dbt build. Let's see how long this would take. It shouldn't take. Last time I tested it, it took me about 30 seconds. But if we have a few people running at the same time, we may get a lot of concurrent individuals. So your query could be queued, but it will work regardless. So my project is being built up. And the main reason I kind of want to build the project here is that if I ever need to test something like, does my model specified all of the columns within the YAML file? So I need to build a project to retrieve that information from the warehouse and then test against it. So that way we make sure that YAML files are done correctly. Afterwards, we're going to go ahead and jump into configuring pre-commit. So now we installed it. We need to define as well, how do we want it to run? What's the default way it needs to run, and what's the default version that we need? Let's see how that looks like. I'm just going to jump into this. So the way to do this is we first need to create a .precommit config.yaml. So we want to create this YAML file in our repo over here. So I'm just going to copy the name And let me actually hide this away. And let me copy the code that you see here in the guide. So just to go a little bit over what I'm defining here. So I'm saying the default stage that I want pre-commit to run automatically is at the commit stage. So as we saw, whenever someone commits, it will run automatically, but you can also define it and say, I want you to run when I try to push my code and create my PR. So there is multiple steps where this could come in. The reason why we want to do it to commit is because we want to stop any developer from committing anything that will break, so that it immediately doesn't kind of waste any time, no PRs is created, they deal with it locally, and then they're allowed to kind of push to production, or create the PR, that is. And in this case, I'm just saying I want the 2.18 version to run. That you can configure as you need.
So yeah, we'll just take a few moments here to talk about auto formatters and linters while you catch up with some of the steps if you're following along. Once again, you can refer to the guide, or if you're in the room, the RTAs can walk around and help you, so raise your hands there. So with this concept of pre-commit, we're trying to auto format and lint all our code. That way it's not pushed to the repo and a code reviewer won't have to do that code review. We're trying to automate that so we can find differences in the code style. If you don't have a code style, DBT Labs has a great style guide that you can refer to implement at your own organization. So auto formatting is where you update your code and inline, and you're trying to keep standards. And then linting is also just highlighting those discrepancies. This helps minimize the amount of time you spend on those stylistic work and maximize the time of functional work. So if you ever used a word processor, seeing those squiggly lines underneath, that's just, we've agreed upon the English grammar, and they're just telling you, hey, you've got an extra space, or maybe that comma's in the wrong place. And so our next concept here is software testing. What we're trying to do here is trying to make everything automated, so we're making checks into the efficacy of our code. There are two main types of tests. Unit testing, which focuses on specific components or pieces of logic in your tests for isolated efficacy, as well as integrated testing, which focuses on broader systems, many components tests for integrated efficacies. So instead of validating an assumption manually, we've automated this, we've codified this, so it can be actually tested again and again. So here, we'll move on to configuring. So we've set the framework for pre-commit, and now we're going to actually install some of those auto linters and formatters. So we'll start with SQL Fluff, we'll move on to YAML lint and DBT gloss.
So why is SQL Fluff important? You want all your developers to be writing code in the same way. So you want that because it makes PR reviews faster. It makes code velocity development faster. And at the same time, everyone has a different standard of writing SQL, especially if they're coming from different companies, they've done SQL differently. So integrating a linter such as SQL Fluff ensures that, okay, you need to follow the way we do things here. And the way we configure this is kind of in the same way that I wanted to configure the pre-commit. I have to create this .precommit config YAML file. And in that file, I'll specify what are my rules, what are certain changes that I want to make. So let's go ahead and do this. But at the same time, I also have to specify in the pre-commit YAML file that I need to access SQL Fluff. So in this case, I tell pre-commit, okay, I want to use SQL Fluff. Here's the repo. Here's the version of SQL Fluff that I want to use. And here are the hooks from SQL Fluff that I want to use, which means basically here are the tests from SQL Fluff that I want to use. The first one, you can see in the ID, it's called SQL Fluff lint. So this one will actually lint. It will analyze your files. It will only look at the files that you change. Automatically, that's what it does, but you can force it to look at everything as well. And you can specify dependencies. So here we can make sure that I'm running dbt Snowflake. In this case, there's a typo in this, but in the guide, it's fine. It should be 1.2.0, not 1.3.0. And SQL Fluff also is not just for dbt. SQL Fluff can be used in many use cases. So in this case, we also want to make sure that we're using the dbt templater of SQL Fluff, because we need to handle Jinjas, we need to handle all of these special cases and macros And this templater allows us to do so. And then we have the SQL fix hook that we have here. This one will fix any sort of SQL issue. So if you have a leading comma and you want it to be a trailing comma, it will do those fixes for you, or like indentations. However, you can see here that in this ID, I specified that I want it to be a manual hook. So I don't want you to fix things automatically for me whenever someone is committing, because a lot of times it could introduce more errors than good. You want to be able to either run this command just manually for yourself, or you want to fix the errors yourself. Now let's go ahead and create the SQL file. So in this case, I'm going to jump over here. Before I do so, I'm just going to copy the pre-commit config, and I'm going to add it to the pre-commit config YAML file. Don't forget to save. I added the repo, so now I want to add SQL, but I also want to configure SQL. So I'm going to go ahead and create a .SQL file. And within this SQL file, I'm going to copy this code that we see here from the guide. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail in this code, but just to kind of give you an idea. So this is where you specify your templater over here. You specify what SQL dialect you're going to be using. Every warehouse is different. In this case, you're specifying as well that we're going to be using trailing commas. I prefer leading commas, but that's a different story. You can specify the tab sizes that you need, or how long you want the lines to be. And you can even specify every single rule that is available for SQL. So this is usually the default that we like to use and that we kind of show clients. So feel free to go ahead and look at how we like to configure SQL, but you can configure it in exactly the way that you need to. So now that I've configured SQL over here, I do also need to create a SQL ignore file. So in this case, I don't want to lint and have SQL test the targets folder or the dbt package folder or the macros or analyses, because these don't actually create models themselves. And I don't want them to be part of the test. So I'll go ahead and create a SQL ignore.
While you're there, Hassan, let's just a small typo on the pre-commit YAML file, just a dot in front of the pre-commit. That way you'll be able to run that.
Good catch.
So yeah, all of our files that we'll be configuring and adding are in the root folder. So they should all just sit at the top level there.
You made me double check SQL ignore and SQL, but we should be good to go. And then the same thing we want to do with YAMLs. So we want to install YAML lint for the same reason that I explained with SQL. It's just in this case, we're going to be focusing on YAML. Same thing, we're going to add it to the pre-commit config YAML file, and then we're going to configure YAML lint itself. So let me go ahead and copy that YAML lint repo and add it to the pre-commit. So this is there. And at the same time, I'm going to create a .yaml lint file. So over here, .yaml lint file. Did I do it with 2 L's? Yes, I did. And similarly, we're just configuring things like line length, indentations. What is it that we want to enable, disable within YAML lint? So really depends on how you want to set up YAML lint, but feel free to set it up in the same way that we do it here. And finally, going beyond linters and actually testing a few things within your DBT project, we're going to be using and installing DBT Gloss. So DBT Gloss is a fork of pre-commit DBT. Pre-commit DBT allowed us to test a lot of things in our DBT project, such as, do source tables have descriptions? Do models have descriptions? Did you actually show us, or did you actually list out all of the columns in your YAML files that are in this model? you have tests within your models, and there's so many more hooks that you could install. But in this case, I'm just going to be working with the 5 that you see here. And the reason why we forked it and renamed to DBT class, 1, to make it easier to understand, but 2, it's because the original one is no longer maintained, and we wanted to continue maintaining this really important repo. If you can see, there's the last ID here, which is the last hook. We check if the model has tests. So we have 2 arguments. It's just to specify that we wanted to test and make sure that at least 2 tests on every YAML file are present. So in terms of how we're going to be doing it, actually, we didn't do it just yet. I'm going to add DBT gloss in the same manner. And in this case, I don't need further configuration than just adding it over here, because in this case, it's just all about specifying which hook you want to run, which hook you don't want to run. And you can go into the repo to get a list of all of the different tests that you could add to your project. Finally, I think we're here. But of course, the one thing is about the README file. I'm not going to go ahead and copy the README file, but we just wanted to make a note that it is important to update your README file within the project to tell all of the developers, what did you just install? Why is pre-commit important? Why is SQL Fluff important? And how do they work with it?
Yeah, also, just to add, if you're onboarding a new developer or a new team, it's nice to have there so they can read what your style guide is and what those reinforced automations and tests are. And yeah, we get everyone on the same page, once again, de-risking and speeding up development. So we're going to work with pre-commit. We're just going to take a breath here. What we've done so far is configure a lot of files. So pre-commit is our framework. We've included the repos for SQL Fluff, which lint your SQL files. We have YAML lint, which lint your YAML files, and DBT gloss, which is kind of what I like to think of as a linter for DBT. So each of those had a configure file. Each of them had a set of rules that we're looking to standardize and test. And now we're going to actually work with pre-commit.
So the hooks that we define in the configuration YAML file, these will be the hooks that will run automatically every time a developer now tries to commit. You can definitely run all of them manually, or you could also change when they run as we specified beforehand. Now, what we want to do is actually install these hooks, have them run in this virtual environment, and actually do the testing. So to do so, we're just going to do a quick pre-commit install. So make sure that file is saved. I'm going to open up the terminal over here, and I'm going to say pre-commit install. So now it should connect to all of these repos and install what I need. As you can see, it's really, really fast, actually. If you see this pre-commit installed, that's it. That's all you need to do to install all of these tests that you're about to run. And then, how do we actually work with pre-commit? So there are different ways of running it. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and start by running it manually. You can run all of the hooks at the same time on all of your files. So even if you haven't committed anything, you haven't made changes, you can run it on everything. Or you can specify specific tests, such as if you only want to run SQL Fluff or YAML lint or a specific hook, you can do so. You just need to say pre-commit, run, define the stage, and what is it that you want it to run. In this case, I'm going to start off by saying pre-commit. Actually, I should have just copied it. You know what? I'm going to copy this test here. That's going to showcase all of the errors that I currently have. So normally, in a normal development workflow, you're not going to be doing that because you're only going to be running it on things that you've changed. But in this case, since there are known broken issues within this specific branch, I want it to tell me what they are. So the first thing that it's going to do is just going to go in the order that was defined. It's going to go with the SQL Fluff lint. And it starts to showing me a few issues that we have here. So if I scroll a little bit up, I see, okay, SQL Fluff lint failed. There is a failure. There is an issue. It's telling me that I have this dim products.sql file that have keywords that is in uppercase where they must be lowercase, and the indentation is not consistent across this file. So within this file, we have these two issues that are popping up. This we can ignore, it's just doing some other kind of linting, but there is no other errors than these two. And then after it finishes, it goes on to running YAML lint. And within YAML lint, it found that within the dim products YAML file, we have some trailing spaces that we want to fix up, and it tells us where they are. As well as then it goes on to actually running the DBT gloss, and it sees here, okay, we generated documentation, that's fine, the source tables have description, so that passed, but where we failed is the model columns have description. So we failed to give a description to a column called product_price within the dim products.sql file. So in the YAML, it's telling us, hey, you need to give a description to this. So this is super helpful when someone's adding columns, removing columns. It makes sure that, hey, things are consistent. And same thing when check the model has all the columns in the properties file. So same thing, it's showing me that I'm missing product ID. So this is why it was good to run the dbt build command beforehand. So now it's able to check against the warehouse that did I specify all the columns in my YAML file, and I missed product ID, of course. And lastly, within the same file, I am missing tests. So it has only 0 tests when it expected 2. So let's go ahead and actually fix some of these issues. So what I'm going to do, just for the sake of time, I will run the autofix command that I told you to be careful with. In this case, it should still run fine. So I'm going to say pre-commit run hook stage manual SQL fluff fix, and I'm going to let it fix my SQL fluff issues for me. And afterwards, once this is done, perfect, everything passed, I can go ahead and just lint to double check and make sure that it actually fixed the issues that I had. So I'll go ahead and, oops, I don't want to run everything here. So let me ignore this. This shouldn't be. Let's see. It didn't work.
Oh, one more column, one more. You're missing a quote, that's why.
Yeah, I know, but I was trying to actually erase it. Let's see. This quote?
No, the other one. The tilt one. Control-C. There you go.
Perfect. Thank you. Now, Notion is always fun with this. Okay. So let me just make sure that I'm actually copying the right piece of code. Copy.
Yeah, so while
Fantastic.
Hassan is doing that, why is this important as a developer? So maybe you're, once again, you're developing as a DBT developer, you're writing this code. Maybe you don't want to commit this code just yet. Maybe you just want to double check your own work before you do this commit. These are great ways to manually run these tests. That way you can, take ownership of all those failures and then fix those failures before you commit again.
So the linting worked. Once I linted, it showed me that all of my tests passed, and you can see that the autofix changed my capitalized letters to lowercase, and at the same time, if I scroll down here, we had some bad indentation, and that automatically got fixed for us. So we can go ahead and then move on to the next problem that we had, which is in the YAML file. So in this case, I want to still scroll up to double check. So yes, in dim products YAML, line 6 and 7. So I'm going to try to find this file over here. And I'm going to hide you. So 6 and 7, we have these kind of random extra spaces, and it happens, especially if you're just pressing the enter key. I'm going to go ahead and manually remove this and move on to the next issue at hand, which is model columns have descriptions. So product price does not have a description. So in this case, product price, the column that we see here is just missing a description. I'll copy this so that I can actually add this in. And I want to double check if there is a doc block for product price that I could use here instead of doing something that is manual. I can see this markdown file over here. And in this markdown file, we've already specified a definition for the product price column. Now, markdown files, doc blocks are not part of this workshop, but this is a way to have one centralized space where you have all of your definitions for your columns and models, and you can then just kind of refer them everywhere else within the project. Going back to the YAML, I'm going to replace this doc block with the correct description. And then I believe we wanted to also check to make sure that we have product ID. So product ID was missing in my YAML. I'll go ahead and add that in. Put this here. Rename this to product ID. And also, do I have a definition for product ID that I could leverage here? Backend commerce, production product ID. Let me take this.
So you can see really, like going through all those errors and failures, Hassan is quickly troubleshooting his own code, which is super helpful, you know. You don't want to be searching your whole modified or created code base just to see what you're throwing errors on.
And in this case, I am doing it a little bit fast. I am being mindful of time, but I just wanted to add these two things. And then finally, I believe I need to add tests, and it's in the same one, so dim products. So let me go ahead and add a few tests. I'm gonna actually cheat a little bit here and just copy paste again from another YAML file so that I don't accidentally do any mistakes with indentation. Now, I'm gonna add these two tests to product ID. We should definitely make sure that it is not null and that is unique. So now, I fixed the SQL issues, the YAML issues, added test, make sure I have all of my columns, and I added the description. So now, if I go back and I try to run that manual command, not this one again, oh God. Let me do it from here. So the one thing is that I'm still testing this manually. The last thing is to see how does it actually work when I want to commit these changes and open up a PR. So for this, SQL Fluff passed, YAML passed, and the dbt clause commands are as well. Everything passed, so fantastic. So afterwards, we fixed all of these issues. We can now just actually commit our changes and try to create this PR. So I'll go ahead and say git add, so I can change my stages, and then I'm gonna create a commit. I'm gonna call it resolve style issues, and as you can see here, as soon as I try to commit, SQL Fluff will run and do the same test. So now, once you have all of this set up, your developers can no longer just commit as they please. There are certain frameworks, certain guardrails that you've now implemented within your project that needs to be followed. So everything passed, I can commit, and the commit has been done. And we are at the final step. So
yeah, let's take a pause there. So we saw Hassan manually going through all those linters and calling SQL Fluff and calling YAML lint. That's ownership as a developer, as a DBT developer. Once again, we're trying to de-risk development, speed up development. We're trying to let the code reviewer take their time in actually looking at the logic of the code as opposed to these stylistic things that can take up a lot of time. So there we saw the pre-commit in action. Hassan did all the fixes. He added all the modified and created files, and then he committed those files. And as soon as he committed it, that hook was triggered, ran all those tests again, and then we saw all green, so that's great. And so as a code reviewer, very thankful that I don't need to look at the SQL, I don't need to look at the YAML, I don't need to look at those tests that should be there for primary keys. So this is only one example of the development automation within the broader DBT software development lifecycle.
So just kind of like we said before, there are many types of workflow automations that you could have. The one that we did today was just doing this installation of pre-commit locally and having it run automatically. But you should definitely have continuous integration enabled on DBT Cloud if you don't have it, because you want then after these tests kind of get pushed to GitHub and this PR is created, you then want to be able to test out these changes against the database and make sure everything is running fine. And of course, another thing that you should implement if you don't have so already is PR templates. So it's a very easy way to make sure that every time a PR is created, your developers are kind of going through checks. Do I have a description of what I'm doing here? Am I conveying this properly? Do I have a screenshot of the DAG that I just built out? Data development can get complex. SQL files can get super complex, especially if you have a lot of them. So the more that you have these guardrails and these processes, it helps it to standardize everything and make sure everything is running smoothly. And with that, that is our workshop for today. Thank you so much for attending. If you have any questions, feel free to ask us on Slack, the TAs, and of course, come see us at the booth. So thank you.
Thanks so much to Hassan and Cecile for this great, this is, I feel confident in saying this is the most detailed workshop at Coalesce this year. So thanks for all the hard work prepping for this. Please do stop by and play some Plinko at their table over in Storyville Hall. And thanks, enjoy the rest of Coalesce.